look at a group of women who had had this same journey, we look at each other with a very knowing smile. We each know what it's like. We were each diagnosed. Each had families, or they had people they had to tell this terrible diagnosis. And yet to be together as survivors, you feel like you can conquer anything. And then to turn that to where you can help others, that's been the biggest blessing for me.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chakowski. I'm one of the worship directors here at First United Methodist Church, Richardson. And with me every week is one of our associate pastors, Josh Fitzpatrick. Josh, good to be with you today.
It's good to be back, Eric. I'm glad you invited me back.
Well, it was on the fence. I was on the fence a little bit, but the board said I had to.
The board of the podcast?
Yeah, that's right.
That we don't have.
That's right. Well, fall is in the air. It is officially fall, and that means October's coming, and October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This is a subject that affects many, many people. In fact, I would venture a guess to say that almost everyone either knows someone, has a family member, a friend, or a friend of a friend that has experienced breast cancer, walked this journey, and had this as a major part of their story. And so this is a topic that we know affects a lot of people, and we want to have a conversation about today.
I know in my house, this topic is one that is particularly relevant as my wife, Megan, is a physician. She's a radiologist, and her subspecialty is actually in breast imaging. And so we share a conviction for people who are on this journey and the way that it becomes a part of their story.
And these stories are often incredibly difficult to tell. But we are honored today to have two women who have graciously agreed to share their stories, that it might encourage others along the way, bring some awareness to the subject. And we are honored today to welcome Allyson Martin and Brenda Duckett.
Today on the podcast, we are honored to be joined by a member of First United Methodist Church, Richardson, who has a story to tell today that we hope will impact many of our listeners. Allyson Martin, it is a joy to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
So those of us who know you well, but there are listeners we know that don't know you. Would you tell us a little bit about your story, maybe where you're from and your family, and what brought you to this point here today?
I'm from Garland, so not very far away. Mm-hmm. Grew up in the Methodist church and been coming to this church, I think, about 4 years, I figured out the other day. I met my husband here on the first day that I came to Modern Worship. Wow. Yeah, we sat next to each other.
Matchmaker.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, we didn't start dating immediately, but we sat by each other that day, and then we had a small group the first day that I came here.
What brought you to First Methodist in the first place?
I moved from Denton to Carrollton, and then I honestly just Googled places that had young adult groups, and it came up, and it looked cool, and I kind of stalked the Facebook page and just went for it. I think I emailed Julie maybe, and there was like a small group starting 2 weeks from then or something, so I was like, okay, I'll just go that day and
the rest is history.
See what happens, yeah.
4 years later.
I loved it, yeah.
Cool.
Well, we love having you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you as a member of the church. So, like anything in life, everyone has a unique story, and particularly with you when it comes to a diagnosis like breast cancer. I was wondering if you could walk us through the story of your own diagnosis.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer in her 30s, and then she passed away in her 50s. So when I turned around, almost 30, I guess, I started thinking about it. It was like the hype with Angelina Jolie, and she had like the preventative mastectomy because she had the gene, and then I knew someone else that had the gene, and so I'm going to talk to my doctor and see if maybe I have that. And so I talked to her, and she recommended getting the testing done, but it all came back negative. But it turns out if you have a family history, and then especially the age that my grandmother was, you're still at a much higher risk. So she recommended starting mammograms that year at 30. And so I did them faithfully every year from 30 to 35, no issues. And then at 35, they call me and they're like, oh, we see something funny on there. I think you need to come back and do the 3D, more extensive one. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty annoyed because I didn't want to have to do that. I just thought it's going to be nothing. You're going in for nothing. Just, if anybody's going to have a false positive on something, it's going to be me. So I went in and had it done, and then they immediately called me back to the radiologist, I guess it is, and said, we see this, these abnormalities. It could be nothing. It could be pre-cancer. It could be early stage cancer. So you need to have a biopsy, see what it is. So I still was really bitter because I did not want to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that it was just going to be nothing. I believed that it was nothing. So it was just a big pain in the butt. I need to take a day off of work, pay extra money. So I did it anyways, of course. And then I think it was 3 days later, they call and say that it is breast cancer. And so I need to see a breast surgeon, oncologist. And then they basically told me over the phone, you probably just need surgery, but you need to go see the doctor and figure it out. So I went into the surgeon and oncologist thinking, I just need a lumpectomy. I'll be 2 weeks out of work, on my way, no big deal. I had a little bit of denial there, but went in, didn't even think the word mastectomy was even going to be spoken. I just did not think it was that big of a deal. So basically she gave me 3 choices, and it turns out they're not nearly as simple as I thought they were going to be. But the first one was you can have a lumpectomy, but then you still need to have radiation and be on hormone-blocking medicine because it was estrogen and progesterone receptor positive. So the hormone blockers protect you from having recurrence. But the trick with that is you cannot get pregnant on that. And I still had the goal of having kids. And that medicine would be for 5 to 10 years. So I was already 35. So that kind of was disappointing. And then, I could have a single mastectomy, but still need to be on that medicine for 5 to 10 years. Or the third choice was having a double mastectomy as long as everything was as it seems, have surgery and be done with it. And so I went in not even thinking that was even going to be on the table whatsoever, not thinking it was that complicated, and then left there having decided to have a double mastectomy, and then really just felt complete peace and relief having made that decision. So I had that done on December 6th.
Wow. Yep. Now, you're married. When you go through things like this, I could imagine there's a sort of tension. Do I tell him right away? Do I wait? How do I tell him? I'm curious how Kyle, what his reaction was, and at what point in this process you were teammates.
Well, I told him, I guess, from the first phone call that was, you have breast cancer. Of course, he works night shifts, so he was asleep. So I had called him, like while I'm at work, and waiting for him to wake up, and finally called me back and told him, and his response was just kind of like, oh, shoot. Because I think that I had downplayed it so much, and I truly believed it was nothing, that I think everybody around me kind of thought it was going to be nothing. So I have a way of calming everyone else down, I guess. And so I think he was shocked, but he and I tend to handle things really logically and methodically, and kind of like, okay, we need to know the facts, we need to know the realistic expectations, and we need to know how to take care of it and then get it done. So that's really the way that we respond to things. So we make a good team in that way. And he went with me to my appointment and supported my decisions. And we really talked it through, for a couple hours while we were there at the hospital that day at different appointments. And by the time we left, we were in agreement.
You mentioned, Allyson, that you guys are able to handle a lot of things like that logically and methodically. I could still imagine, though, that so many times in life, and especially in a situation like this, people surely could be discouraging in a situation like that with a diagnosis that you have and knowing the options that are available and the path that may lie ahead. Did you find moments like that in your experience? In some of the tougher days, how did you make it through those days?
I guess I had so many friends and family, for one thing, that were supporting us and calling and checking on me. And, our friends tend to be more on the emotional side. And so they kind of balance us out, I guess, bringing up those things like, oh, yeah, I guess I should be, feeling that way, or, talking about it. And so they're good about that, bringing that out and making me kind of talk about things and be more open. But, I guess also just I tend to just have a really good outlook on things, or be an optimist even when it might annoy other people. Well, look at the bright side. I caught it early. I only have to do this surgery. Look at all the good things about it, how lucky I was. to have even known to be getting my testing done so early and catching it probably 5-6 years before I would have otherwise. And so I tend to look at those things to kind of keep my head in the right place, I guess, and then bring a lot of humor into it.
Now, I'm curious, you say that you had these friends that were the emotional side. I would imagine you got just a variety of responses from friends. Did you have some that you're just like, that's not helpful? Like to hear something like that?
Well, yeah, I guess not necessarily friends, but just kind of people at random would maybe like tell me like a horror story, you know, kind of thing. And a lot of my patients, you know, the elderly population would kind of...
You're a physical therapist by day, yep.
So I eventually had to tell most of them, you know, I'm going to be off for 4 to 6 weeks, and shared with most of them why. And some of them kind of brought up, you know, oh, yeah, my great aunt had that and blah, 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 and like tell me this awful story. I'm like, okay, that wasn't helpful at all. But, you know, I know how to take that with a grain of salt. But as far as our friends and family, they pretty much just supported me.
And so then on the flip side, what were some of the good things? What were things that were said or done that you just found, wow, that's so helpful in this?
Oh, gosh. Well, as far as the recovery part of everything went, we had so much help. Like people brought us food or gift cards or ordered us food for 2 weeks straight, and maybe even a little longer than that. We never once had to think about food.
Yeah, that's
we
awesome.
gained a few pounds during that time. One of our friends brought a sleeping bag up to the hospital for Kyle. I didn't even know until a few weeks ago that that had happened.
Wow.
Or if I did, I was so out of it at the time. But I had a friend buy me a bra and have it sent to my house because I was telling her how uncomfortable everything was. She was like, oh, you have to try this, you know, and just bought it for me and sent it to me. And one of Kyle's coworkers, she, you know, got straight off of a 12-hour night shift, went straight to Central Market, bought us a huge load of groceries, brought them to our house at like 8 in the morning the day after my surgery, and I'd never even met her before. And so it was just that kind of thing. And then I found out that her mom had breast cancer, so she just got it and knew
that's incredible.
what we would need. And so it's just, people just did so much to support us through that time.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I think that can be such a difficult thing to know for those of us who haven't walked that walk, to know how to be supportive, how to be helpful, the kinds of things to say and not to say, or maybe even, do they want us around? Do they want us to bring, I mean, you know, so often we want to be helpful, but maybe we don't know how to do that. So those sorts of things are helpful. What would you say for those who may have a friend or family member as far as ways that they can be encouraging and walk alongside someone who is going through this journey?
I think one thing is if you feel like hesitant, like you don't know if you should do something, or if you don't know what you should do, or you're not sure, you can't decide, just do it. Go ahead and do it. Even something as simple as send them a gift card for dinner. Or it doesn't have to be something where you're in their way or, you know, you are at their house, you know. But other than that, I think just being patient, you know, no matter what mood they're in or how they're handling things. Not everybody handles things with an optimistic point of view, you know, so you do have to be patient with whatever space that person is in, but continue checking on them. Just let them know that you care, even if it's just a text message or, you know, something just to show that you're thinking about them and that you're acknowledging what they're going through, I think is important.
I think that's super helpful. Each of us are at least 1 degree away from somebody who's gone through this journey. And sometimes when we hear about a diagnosis or something, we don't know what to do. We want to help. And so I love that advice. Just if you can think of something, just go ahead and do it. Now, I'm drawn back to what you said about Kyle's coworker who went grocery shopping. You've never even met her, but part of the reason that she did this, you think, not only because she worked with Kyle, with your husband, but also because her own mother, you said, had breast cancer. So
I'm pretty sure that's what she said, yeah.
I've heard the phrase that this is not a club you want to be in, but it's tighter than any group you could ever be a part of. What do you think draws people who have been on this journey together?
I think part of it is that it's mostly a women's disease. I mean, not entirely, but for the most part. And so it's kind of like this like weird elite women's club where everyone in the club is really strong, like almost don't feel worthy to be in it or like amongst them. It's kind of weird that I'm part of that. I mean, it feels like an honor. You know, we took that picture on Sunday and those women, I'm just like, man, first of all, I'm the youngest one here. These women have probably been through a lot and probably a lot more than me. So it feels like an honor.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So at First United Methodist Richardson, we talk a lot about being citizens of hope. That's a phrase that our senior pastor, Clayton, uses a lot. And not only in our own lives, but that we're able to be vessels of that hope out in the world. You've talked a lot about your optimism and just sort of that outlook on your life. But how do you hope that sharing this part of your story will impact other people?
I guess my biggest hope is that people see the importance of looking at their own family history, for one thing, and if they have any breast cancer or any cancer in their family, talking to their doctor and seeing if they qualify for the early screening too, because, really and truly, it probably saved my life. Who knows exactly what would have happened, but if I had waited until I was in my 40s to start having mammograms, it would have been a different story than catching it within a year. So I really hope that people look at that and that people see that it's not scary. And, go have your mammograms. They're not scary. They're slightly awkward, but you can do it. And kind of hope that as people start doing that, they spread the word too, and that it just keeps going and less people have to catch cancer at such an advanced place.
And then on the tail end of the story, you said you had 3 options for treatment.
Yeah.
And the first 2, if I'm not mistaken, you said would decrease your chance of becoming pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so now you are pregnant. Mm-hmm. And how far along are you?
5.5 months.
Okay. So baby Martin will be here when?
In January.
And that is so exciting.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine the difficulty of making that decision, but it's so cool to see on this end of your journey that the Martin family will soon be 3.
Yeah.
I also want to ask, when you go on a journey like this, your faith has to be tested. Would you mind sharing how maybe your faith grew because of this experience?
Yeah, that's a hard question, but I guess my faith, I never really doubted it. I just knew that, God was there with me through everything, and that in my life, I feel truly like God's timing has been perfect. So everything hasn't happened exactly when or how I thought it was going to happen, but the way it all turned out has been perfect. And so my faith didn't really waver through that.
That's awesome.
So, Allyson, it's been an honor just to hear your story, and we have so appreciated your vulnerability and being willing to talk about it. We also have one question that we ask everyone who comes on the podcast, and that question is this. At this point in your life, what is one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
Oh, that's a hard one. I guess kind of based on my last answer, I think that I would have appreciated somebody telling me or getting it into my head to wait for God's timing. That things do not always happen on your time and the way you think. And sometimes you have to look through the tough times. But really, even those times are exactly where they're supposed to be. And I wish I would have known things were going to all fall into place for me.
That's such a great word for us. I wonder if a lot of times that perspective, understanding that God's timing is perfect, and even though it may be different from our timing, that perspective hopefully gives us a more optimistic look as it has you as well. So again, we're so grateful for you being here and sharing your story, Allyson. Thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Something I found really helpful that Allyson said was the advice she gave when it came to what we can do as friends or family members are diagnosed with something. How do we respond? I feel like a lot of times I'll ask myself, well, what can I do? And then I try to justify it by thinking, well, somebody else is going to help. But Allyson's just very practical advice. Just if you can think of something, do it. Like sending a gift card. I love that. We don't have to necessarily go and knock on their door or physically fill their fridge like she had somebody do, but just sending a gift card as a response to say, hey, I'm thinking about you. I want to support you on this journey.
So often there is that crowd mentality that someone else will take care of it, and that is a great reminder for us that we can take the responsibility to care for people. In fact, we're called to do that over and over and over again in the gospel. So that is a great reminder for us today. The number of people who have stories about the way that breast cancer has affected them are far and wide. Even in our own church, we have a number of people who have walked this journey, and we're excited to hear another story of someone who has her own story. We are excited to welcome Brenda Duckett.
Well, Brenda, it's great to have you on the podcast today. We just want to start off by setting some context for those of us who don't know who you are. Would you mind telling us a little bit of your own story, what maybe brought you to our church in the first place, a little bit about where you're from and your family?
Love to. Thanks for having me. I was born in Dallas, but 3 days later, my family moved to Farmersville, Texas, which is about 30 miles northeast of here. I grew up in the Baptist church, but I married into a Methodist family, and so I have been a Methodist for many, many, many years. My first husband passed away at age 39 of Lou Gehrig's disease, and so I had 2 little girls that I was raising, and this church was such a blessing during that time. John Ogden was the minister, and he just took us under his wing, and I just don't know what I would have done without this church. I was a single mom for 6 years. It was a precious time with my 2 little girls. I had been praying to God to meet a godly man, and when I was principal at Arapahoe or Northridge Elementary here in Richardson, one of my substitute teachers one day said, "Brenda, are you dating anyone?" And I said, "No, there's no good men left. I've given up." And she said, "No, I know one." Turned out his name was Brenda Duckett. He has been such a blessing in my life. That was in January of 93, and we were married in November.
Oh, that is too cool.
I had my 2 girls with me, and he was raising 2 girls. He had also lost his wife.
Wow.
And so we're a blended family.
Wow.
We sent 4 to college. We had 4 weddings, 5 including our own.
Wow.
And we now have 12 beautiful, smart, gorgeous grandchildren. It's been a beautiful story. I told Bert Duckett if I was to marry him, he had to do 2 things. He had to become a Berkner Ram instead of a Plano Wildcat.
Oh, wow.
And he had to become a Methodist. And he said, "Well, I think I can do the Methodist thing. It's the Berkner Ram that kind of bothers me."
That's good.
But the rest is history. And when I tell more of my story, he's an integral part, intertwined with this church and my husband, Bert.
Wow.
Well, I don't know your husband well, but I'm a Plano Wildcat myself.
Oh, right.
So don't hold that against me today.
Okay, I'll try.
So you talk about parts of your story and how you and Bert have had similar parts of your story that gave you an immediate, I think, probably connection early on. But this month we're looking at a lot of people's stories around breast cancer.
Right.
And so would you mind telling us a little bit about the story of your diagnosis and where you went from there?
Okay, and as typical, and I had a double whammy. I retired. 2 months later, was diagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Wow.
It was accidentally caught. I had no symptoms, so that was a blessing. I got that taken care of. I didn't have chemo. It was a radioactive iodine treatment. I'm a good little follower, and so I go for my mammograms every year. 6 months later, I go for my yearly mammogram, and they call you back, that dreaded call that says you need to come back in. We think there's a problem. So the first thing I did was pray. I went back in. They scheduled me for a biopsy. My husband took me for the biopsy. We'll call you in 3 days. Well, that is one of the worst 3 days of your life. I tried to go on with my life, and so I was at a party when I got the call, and when I saw my phone, oh, this call is nothing, or it can change my life forever. It was a call that changed my life forever. The nurse said, "You have cancer." So I pulled myself together. I did not tell anybody. I got in my car. I drove home. Bert was in the garage tinkering with the sprinkler system, and I managed to get into the house. He was in the garage, and I stood at the threshold, and I said, "Bert, how much do you love me?" And he looked at my face, and he knew it was not good news. How he covered the span of that garage to get to me within a matter of seconds, and he held me. We both cried. I said, "Bert, I have cancer." And he said, "No problem. We're in this together. You don't have cancer. We have a fight now, and I will be there every step of the way." So that was the beginning. One of our daughters was having a baby in 2 weeks. And I said, I can't handle all of this. I'm not going to do anything to upset her and throw her, into labor. So we kept a secret for 2 weeks. We didn't tell anybody. Wow. We came to a funeral at the old campus, there was something said in the funeral, and it was the verse, Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. I heard that, and I thought, I am so burdened with this, but I can't tell anybody. The longer you put it off, the harder it is to tell your story. Bert and I were in two cars for some reason. I got in my car, and he got in his car, and we're zooming down Central, and I called him, and I said, Bert, turn around. We're going back to church. I've got to find Clayton. He was in his office. We went in, and we told our story. And he was so calm and so gentle, as Clayton is. I said, I just can't tell anybody. I don't know what to do. And he said, okay, we're going to make a plan. He said, we're going to make a communication plan. You're going to go home and you're going to tell people. You just have to decide who and when and what. We went home. And I said, Bert, I've got a plan for everyone I need to talk to except my parents. I cannot sit down and face my parents and tell them because they will be devastated. Sweet Bert, he said, you call, because I call my friends. I call them my yaya friends. I call my yaya friends. They came over to be with me, and Bert went to Farmersville to tell my parents.
Wow.
In a way that only Bert can. So soothing, they prayed. That was the biggest obstacle. And after that, it was easy.
How did they react?
My mom cried. My dad was very stoic. And the next day, the baby had been born. I talked about this grandbaby that the baby had been born during that 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so I went to tell the daughter who had just had this baby. I waited as long as I could. She was the last one. And I happened to be at her house, and my daddy called. And he couldn't even talk. He was so emotional. And I said, Daddy, it's going to be okay. I've got a great doctor. It's going to be okay. But that's my daddy. I'm a daddy's girl, and I've since lost him. But I'll always remember that conversation.
Wow, incredible. Do you mind if I ask, how long was the journey from diagnosis to being 100% clear?
Okay, diagnosis was in January. The baby was born the 1st of February. Mm-hmm. My hair began to grow out about 1.5 years after that.
Okay.
I was told initially you won't need chemo, radiation will do it. Well, every tumor is different. And when they took out the tumor, it was very invasive and it was fast growing. So I had 3 months of chemo, and then I had 6 weeks of radiation. During that time, during the chemo, I started losing my hair. They told me on day 14, you will lose your hair. No, day 13, still had my hair. I've got this. Day 14, I wake up, and I just touched my hair, and it started falling out.
No way.
So the journey really was, I said, I am not leaving this house. I am not leaving this house because I'm bald and I'm ugly. And supportive friends and, of course, my husband, I did leave the house. I bought me a cute little wig. Mm-hmm. I had scarves. I made it a journey in itself. How can I tie this scarf? How many cute hairdos can I, replace with the wig? So that whole part of the journey was very challenging. But because of my friends and my faith, as they say, faith, family, friends, got me through.
Wow.
Obviously, you've named so many manifestations of the disease and the treatment. I imagine the news itself is a stage of shock and probably grieving through that. But then as you go through treatment and you have these different stages of reaction from the chemo and the radiation and losing your hair and the emotions that go along with that, in the most difficult times, were there specific things that your family and friends found ways to support you during that time?
Well, they did. That's why this is so interesting and such a blessing in my life right now to recall that. we got through it, and then you go on with your life until you guys call and say, let's chat. So it's caused me to look back at what happened. My friends, my closest friends, were always there. They would come see me. They brought food. The church reached out in a big way. And, of course, the big thing, once again, is going back to the support of the people that love you the most. You can be honest around people that you love. I would tend to put on a front with even my best yah-yah friends. Yeah, this is a good day. I'm feeling really good. But when you're with your family, and most of all your husband, there are times that I cried, that I screamed to God. At one point I said, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And do you know, the last time I said that, the phone rang. And it was a really good friend. And all she said was, you know, we have a lake house. If you ever just need to get away. She broke that cycle that I was in. And we did take advantage of that. There would always be something. It was little angels that popped up.
That is so cool.
I had another friend who every week of chemo sent me a magnet for my refrigerator.
Wow.
And it was something about an angel. And those magnets are still on my fridge today.
That is so neat. So if you were to give advice then to someone who was walking with somebody through this journey, what practical things would you say, this is something you should say, this is something you should do?
Practical is good. My mind initially goes to what not to say.
Oh, yeah.
What I didn't want to hear was, oh, Brenda, you're going to be just fine. You're young and you're healthy and you've always taken care of yourself. And I'm not fine. I have cancer. And then I got to where I would say, you know, I don't have cancer. It's gone. So I think as far as other people, to be there to listen, not advise. They don't know.
Yeah, wow.
There's a difference in being sympathetic and empathetic. Sympathy, oh, I'm so sorry you broke your leg. I'm sorry. But empathy, I can look at them and say, I've been there, I've done that. So to surround yourself, there were several people in this church that had walked this same journey. So connect yourself to people that have been there, that have walked that journey, and truly know. Unless you've had chemo, no, you don't really know.
So what do you think it is about the community of women, and some men in some cases as well, that have gone through breast cancer that makes that such a tight-knit community that supports each other?
Mm-hmm. You know, I find it interesting, and mainly because it is, I don't know what the percent is, but it's mainly women. There are men that have breast cancer, but I think it's totally different in the feeling you have as a woman and the feeling that you have as a man. So you take a group of females, so much emphasis on the body and figures. So to look at a group of women, which I had the pleasure to do this last Sunday, I was with 7 or 8 women who had had this same journey. We look at each other with a very knowing smile. We each know what it's like. We were each diagnosed. Each had families, or they had people they had to tell this terrible diagnosis. And yet to be together as survivors, you feel like you can conquer anything. And then to turn that to where you can help others, that's been the biggest blessing for me. You hear people say, well, I'm glad I had cancer. Well, I'm not glad I had cancer. But I'm glad the way I was able to handle the cancer and to help others.
I've had this conversation with several friends who have served in the armed forces, and they speak in a similar way of people that they've gone to the battlefield with. They say, we may not see each other often, we may not agree on a lot of things, but there is a brotherhood or a sisterhood or a camaraderie that no one else shares with us because of the journey and the struggle and the fight that we went through with these people. And I imagine on some level there's some similarities to a cancer journey.
There is, and the ladies that I was with Sunday We were having pictures made and telling stories. And when it was over, I looked at the group and I said, there's a club that no one wants to join, and it's this club. But look at us. Now, we can be warriors to help others. That is the beauty of the club. You had cancer, you defeated cancer, help others.
Well, and I think that's also part of why we're so grateful that you are sharing your story is now you do have the opportunity, and we thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing the journey and the struggles. What do you hope people listening would hear from your story, and what impact do you hope that sharing your story will have on those that are listening to the podcast today?
Well, hopefully there's people listening that need some advice. My advice would be take care of yourself. If you don't do it, no one is. Get those mammograms. 9 times out of 10, everything's okay. But if you're the one that it's not, just know that there's lots of support within your church, within your community, and hopefully your family. It is a scary time. And being a female with this diagnosis has all kinds of ramifications. Don't be afraid to seek therapy if that's what you need. I happen to be in a very supportive, loving marriage, but I can see that that may not be true for everyone. I recommend therapy. You're not losing your femininity. You can use it as a stepping stone to be a totally different person. I am a different person.
I bet.
Because of this. And I have chosen, since I was retired, to be able to volunteer at the hospital and meet other cancer patients. And I always pull my hair and say, it does grow back. Mm-hmm. For a female, that is just something you don't want to deal with. And it's very difficult emotionally. Changes in your body are very difficult, and you need the support that still makes you think you are desirable. There's nothing wrong with you. Sure. This is, my husband called it just a bump in the road. This is a bump in a road. So to be able to do that and to sit down with you guys today is a blessing.
Well, thank you again, Brenda. This has been eye-opening for us, but really we're just so appreciative of your vulnerability and your willingness to share your story. We have one question that we ask every guest that comes on the podcast, and that is this. Up to this point in your life, what is one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
There is such thing as unconditional love. I knew that. People said that. But until you experience unconditional love through our Savior, Lord Jesus Christ, and through my relationship with my husband.
That's a great word for all of us, a hopeful and optimistic word to be reminded of, and that we all have access to that unconditional love of Jesus, and that hopefully we are surrounded or are surrounding ourselves with people that will care for us unconditionally, whether it's a journey like this or difficult journeys that we all go on, because all of us have circumstances that we will come across that are less than ideal, and to have a support system like that will love us through them is really important. So Brenda, thank you again so much for the time, for your story, and we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Something that was consistent in both of those interviews was the support that both Allyson and Brenda had as they went on this path of diagnosis and treatment. We recognize that that's not everybody's story, and that the experience of receiving a breast cancer diagnosis can be very isolating. And so we hope that this episode itself was an encouragement to your heart to just know that there are other people who have walked this path before you.
If you find yourself walking this path, or if you know somebody who is, we want to encourage you to share this episode with them, and also visit our website at fumcr.com/morethansunday, where we can connect you with other people who have been on this journey and hopefully give you some resources and support in the midst of that.
For both of these women, their faith was foundational for giving them hope. And so to that end, we want to leave you with a verse from Psalm 73 that says this: "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever."
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. We've got a new episode coming out every Wednesday, so make sure you also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode. If you want to find out more about First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at fumcr.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Allyson and Brenda for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in next Wednesday when we have a conversation about pets. Have a great week.